Good morning and welcome to This Week.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
The state of our union.
Bottom line is this, people, we got a lot of work to do.
President Obama takes the stage. How will Congress respond?
Washington has to deal with its spending problem. I've had enough of it.
Plus,
please remove that woman.
Drone war drama. A new civil war in the GOP. And when have you heard presidential prospects talk like this?
Tupac's lyrics are probably more insightful.
I'm like basically the healthiest fat guy you've ever seen in your life.
We take on all the week's politics right now.
From ABC News, This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Reporting from ABC News headquarters, George Stephanopoulos.
Hello again. Here in the Northeast, we are still digging out from that massive blizzard. New York spared the worst. More than 3 feet in parts of Connecticut and Massachusetts. 40 million people affected. Over 350,000 homes without power. ABC News will keep an eye on that all day long. And right here, we're grateful that everyone on the Powerhouse Roundtable made it in planes, trains, and automobiles through the storm because we have a packed week of politics around the table. ABC's chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, Republican strategist Nicolle Wallace, President Obama's deputy campaign manager, Stephanie Cutter, both White House veterans, and from the Congress, Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma, Keith Ellison, Democrat of Minnesota. Let's get right to it. John, Karl, you've been digging into the White House right now. What are their plans for the State of the Union?
The White House, the president wants to see this, the headline coming out of the speech as it was about jobs and the economy. That's going to be the focus here. They're a little stung, George, by some of the criticism of the inaugural for not focusing on jobs and the economy.
Fair criticism.
They would argue that it's not fair, but that's so. This is going to have new initiatives on infrastructure, on education, on clean energy, and it's going to be all about the middle class, expanding the middle class, and a big warning on this. The automatic spending cuts that are scheduled to go into effect on March 1st. I
do want to talk about that. That sequester across the board spending cuts on March 1st. How about the tone, though? One of the things we've seen from the president since his reelection in November, fairly confrontational across the board.
And I don't expect to see much of a change on that. Although on one issue, even as he's going to be proposing new initiatives, and these are initiatives that will cost money. We're not talking massive new stimulus program here, but these are new spending initiatives. He is going to make what White House officials are describing as a progressive case for deficit reduction, that still needs to be done, even entitlement reform. And the progressive case is if these programs continue to grow out of control, they crowd out other initiatives, other priorities that are, the progressives hold dear on education, on infrastructure, social programs.
One of the other things we're going to see, Congressman Ellison, you and several other members of the Democratic caucus going to be bringing as guests into the chamber victims of gun violence.
That's right. As a matter of fact, a young man named Sammy Rahimam, who lost his father in a tragic event in Minneapolis, is going to be joining me, and Jim Langevin and I and Rosa DeLauro have asked our colleagues. We've got about 30 members who are inviting victims of gun violence to be in the gallery, and we're really looking forward to them being with us because they're witnesses to the need for sane, sensible reform in the area of gun violence prevention.
Congressman Cole, what's your sense of what can get done on that this year? Gabby Giffords will also be in the hall on Tuesday. It seems to me, reading the tea leaves, it looks like some kind of consensus is building around universal background checks, but the assault weapons ban likely to go nowhere.
Well, I think certainly in the assault weapon ban, you're absolutely correct. Look, I think this starts in the Senate, and we'll see what Harry Reid can get done. I mean, most of the key players here have NRAA ratings, including the majority leader, Chairman Leahy. You've got 6 Democrats up in states that the president got 42% or less in. I don't think they're going to be too enamored with this. So I think that pushes you toward things like background checks. In the House, it's going to be tougher. I mean, that's just the reality of it politically. So I would expect something to be done. I think there's going to be a lot of hearings, but probably more in the mental health area, potentially in some of the background checked area. But anything that hints towards some sort of national registry won't make it. And anything that really materially makes it more difficult for people to exercise Second Amendment rights, not going to happen.
I tell you, I don't agree. I hope that I think the odds of something happening are determined by the determination of people who push those things. And when the folks who are going to be joining me and Jim Langevin, we don't want to take the right of folks to own a gun away. I own a gun myself. But we do believe that when you got 20 dead first graders, we need action in this country. And I'm sorry, most NRA members agree with us, by the way.
Let me bring this to Stephanie Cutter, because a big part of the question will be where the president does put the emphasis on Tuesday night. We heard Karl say, and I think that's right. Big focus on jobs. One of the things you're seeing coming into this, and I want to put this up on the board, President Obama's approval rating coming in at about 52%. That has him about where President Bush was at the start of his second term, pretty far below where Clinton and Reagan were. So how do you expect him to husband that capital that he has remaining?
Well, I think that he's going to continue doing what he has been doing. And you guys use the word confrontational. I would use a different word, where he's going to lay out the case for the things that he thinks this country needs to accomplish. There'll be very familiar themes. The economy will be central to this speech, and how we grow the economy so that everybody can participate, a fair shot, pay your fair share. But there'll be other things that he does lay out. He'll lay out the looming deadline on the sequester, the tough choices that we have to make around it, and the consequences if we let this sequester go into effect, and cuts to some pretty critical programs. So I think the State of the Union is always an important moment in a presidency. This is another chance to make the case, not just to the people sitting in that room, but to the country of the tough choices that we have to make, and I think he'll make it.
And Nicolle, Wallace, a cautionary tale from President Bush's State of the Union address going into his second term, big focus on Social Security privatization, Social Security reform, fell aground.
That's right, because I think he made the proposal to reform Social Security without having his own party on board. That's a lesson for any president. But I think President Obama did the Republican Party a huge favor by delivering an inaugural address that was historically combative. He did not deliver the kind of inaugural address that people are accustomed to in recent history. Instead, he came out and in really, in a spirited way, I wouldn't call them fighting words, but a very spirited defense of an aggressively progressive agenda. I'm told by staffers from Marco Rubio's office that he had a certain kind of response to the State of the Union in mind. He tore it up and started again. Republicans now are ready to, I think, go toe-to-toe with a very spirited president who I think is ready to advance a progressive agenda. I think that this will help Republicans really, match spirit with spirit and make a conservative case.
On Marco Rubio's response, the expectation for some is this is a chance for him to really showcase his immigration plan. But I'm told that Rubio's response touches very little on immigration.
That's right.
This will be a very confrontational speech taking on the president. It will touch on immigration, but it is not an immigration speech.
And the same themes that you described, though. He's going to talk about the middle class, and he's going to talk about the same things you talked about, how to bring opportunity to every corner of this country. So I think it'll be really a battle of ideas.
Which is great, and what it should be. I just want to take one note on the inaugural address. It has been described as a speech with a list of progressive ideas. But if you actually look at what the president talked about, that's not progressive. That's actually the center of the country right now. Yeah. Whether it's gay marriage or climate change, immigration. You've seen how far we've been able to move the immigration debate. That's where the country is. And I think as Republicans are trying to remake themselves and brush up on their talking points, they need to really realize where the country has moved.
I think you're right about where the country is, but one of the
issues.
things we've also seen in those issues like guns and immigration, climate change, very low on people's priorities now. Economy front and center. That's what the president's going to be focused on. You've all mentioned the sequester that is coming up as well. I want to dig into that just a little bit, because it seemed like when this sequester was proposed back in 2011, it was proposed because no one wanted or expected it to happen. Take a look.
The whole idea of the sequester was to make sure that both sides felt obligated to move off rigid positions.
The sequester is ugly. It was designed to be ugly because we didn't want anybody to go there.
The very idea of those automatic cuts is that they are so unacceptable that few of us will want to see them enacted, and most of us will be willing to compromise in order to avoid them.
What a difference a year makes. Congressman Cole, it's gone from irresponsible to what seems like inevitable right now.
I think it is inevitable, quite frankly. Look, for the president, this was a presidential suggestion back in 2011, an idea, and yet the president himself hasn't put out any alternative. Republicans twice in the House have passed legislation to deal with it, once as early as last May, again after the election in December. Senates have never picked up either of those bills, never offered their own thing. Now we're 3 weeks out, and folks are worried. They ought to be worried. On the other hand, these cuts are going to occur. Now, the real choice here is simply, do you want cuts to be redistributed in other ways, which is the sensible thing to do, or do you want to let this happen? I think Republicans are quite prepared to negotiate on redistributing
And you're
cuts.
saying all cuts. No, Republicans are accepting absolutely no revenue.
No, look, absolutely none. The president accepted no spending cuts back in the fiscal cliff deal 45 days ago. So you get no spending cuts back then you're going to get no revenue now.
Well, Tom, the problem with saying this is the president's idea is that you voted for the Budget Control Act. I voted against it. We wouldn't have ever been talking about the Budget Control Act, but for your party refused to negotiate on the debt ceiling, something that has been routinely increased as the country needed it. You used that occasion.
That's not the
case. You used it on that occasion in 2011, August, to basically say we're going to default on the country's obligations, or you're going to give us dramatic spending cuts. That's how we got to the Budget Control Act. But let me tell you, the bottom line is this sequester is going to put 1 million people out of work. No, 600,000. Excuse me. Got to get my numbers right. 600,000 people out of work. And this is going to increase unemployment. It's going to increase the deficit because people paying taxes means that we're lowering the deficit. It's going to do everything opposite to what your party says that they want. It's going to create uncertainty. It's going to increase the deficit. It's going to create unemployment. It's going to be a problem.
Proposals to deal with it, Keith. We don't have a presidential
proposal. Take it or leave it proposal.
We don't even have a proposal from the president.
You got a proposal from the Progressive Caucus.
Well,
let me tell you about the Balancing Act.
That's fine, but we don't have it from the Senate.
Let him finish.
I don't think you speak for the president. So let's see.
John, Karl, take that up, the question. The president has given a couple of speeches where he says he wants a balanced approach, but no line-by-line proposal on the table right now.
Yeah, and there's been internal debate in the White House on this, but I've got to tell you, at the White House, they seem to think that there will eventually be a compromise here to avert these cuts. I see.
But not before March. Not before
March 1st. Eventually, the pressure comes, the negative consequences. But I see zero chance of a deal on this. I don't see any chance because you have Republicans, and Republicans have done a great job of saying this was the president's idea. They point to Bob Woodward's book. It was clearly the president's idea. But I've talked to Republicans, and not just the radical House guys, but a prominent Republican senator this week told me that he loves the sequester because it's actual real cuts.
I want to bring that to Nicolle Wallace. I think that's a pretty widespread sentiment right now. On the other hand, you hear from the White House and Democratic operatives who say that all may be well and good, but Republicans are going to get blamed for this.
Well, Stephanie talked about where the country is. The country is pretty strongly in support of big cuts to a bloated federal government. And I think if you take it to the whole country, that would include the defense budget. I think that no one is interested in cutting anything that would impede our military readiness. No one wants to take anything at all from any of our troops on the front lines. But to say that in the entire Pentagon budget there isn't an iota of room for cuts like this, for meaningful cuts, would be lying.
And this is significant. You have Republicans saying the Pentagon budget can be cut without jeopardizing national security. Not all of them. I mean, you have people like John McCain warning that the sky will fall. But you have a lot of Republicans, privately and publicly, saying that there is room to cut the Pentagon budget.
As long as you hold harmless everything that deals with troop readiness, everything that deals with troops on the front lines, with military families. But there's plenty of room in the procurement budgets, in the healthcare system. There's plenty of room for reforms and for making.
And I want to come to that in a second. But the problem will be, I think, for the White House broadly, and for the country, is the point that Congressman Ellison makes. You hit the sequester right now. That is going to have a real economic impact right away.
Absolutely. And I think you'll hear the president most likely talk about that on Tuesday night. We can't have any more self-inflicted wounds on this economy. The economy is poised to take off if we do the right things. Having massive across the board cuts to some critical programs. I mean, you're talking about education, healthcare, things that actually we need, cops, to make the economy grow. A couple of things. One, the president does have a plan on the table. It's the $4 trillion deficit reduction plan that's been on the table for almost 2 years now. It's balanced deficit reduction. We've already cut more $2 trillion out of the budget. It's balanced revenue. It's balanced entitlement reform. That's on the table. It's been on the table. Number two, where the country is, the country believes we need to do something about deficit reform. But if you look at the exit polls from this last election, upwards of 60% people coming out voting for the president, voting generally, think that we need to reduce our deficit in a balanced way. Balanced means everybody pays their fair share, which means that includes revenue. And right now, it's 3 to 1 in terms of cuts versus revenue. That's not fair.
The Democrats are exactly where the Republicans were 6 weeks ago. Look, taxes were going up by law. The only question was, were you going to negotiate a good package, save as many of the Bush tax cuts as you could? We eventually got there. We got there with no cuts from the president. Now these cuts are coming by law, and it's a law that the president signed and advocated. And he's put no real proposal on the table, with all due respect. And the reality is the cuts are going to come. Now, we'll sit down and renegotiate where they come from. We think we can do a lot better job across the board.
Can we just remember why these cuts
done
are
that twice. The
There's an
president
enforcement
hadn't responded.
mechanism. It was meant to be an enforcement mechanism for balance reduction.
That with the fiscal cliffs on New Year's Day, you'd have high-income people who already have a lot of discretionary income seeing taxes go up. That's not going to hurt the economy. This thing is going to put 600,000 people out of work, and we're talking cops, we're talking teachers. Pink slips will be going out on
that's why
March 1st.
That's why Republicans have offered a better set of cuts.
This is why we need to negotiate this thing and not just say it's going to be sequester or our way.
We've actually passed legislation twice.
Come on. And all of it
the president won't go to
how many Democratic votes you get on that?
I think that we have
not
to
many.
Remember why we did this in the first place. We did this not because we wanted these cuts to go into place. Nobody wanted these cuts to go into place.
Right.
This was an enforcement mechanism for Congress to come together, finally come together, to pass balanced deficit reform, deficit reduction. These across-the-board cuts is not going to get us there because it's going to strangle our economy, slow growth, which will increase the deficit.
So it won't get us there until we deal with
the choices that people are making here are across-the-board cut, which could be 10,000 teachers, or asking oil companies to pay their fair share.
But Democrats
That's what
are not
choice
the victims of the sequester. It's so funny to hear Democrats cry about the sequester. Democrats control the executive branch, they control the Senate, and they're in a position to negotiate with Republicans who have put out 2 packages of alternative cuts. So
take it or leave it packages.
Well, Democrats haven't come to the
just
table.
pass something in the Senate and respond. That's not take it or leave it. That's like the process. They haven't been able to pass anything. The president hasn't proposed anything. We're 3 weeks away. We acted in May of last year. We acted again in December.
And Senator Reid is now saying that he is going to pass a budget out of the Senate this year. But I want to bring this back to John Karl, because when you look at the sequester coming in on March 1st, it seems like even the bigger hammer is 3.5 weeks later, March 27th. The entire government runs out of money. The last time that happened, the government shutdown was 1995. That did backfire on the House Republicans.
Yeah, we face a government shutdown, and then not long after that, we have to deal with the debt ceiling yet again. So it seems to me that the real battle, like I said, there's zero chance the sequester deal will happen before March 1st. Those automatic spending cuts will go into effect. You will start probably seeing notices going out from the federal government on furloughing employees, being on notice that they may be furloughed. But the real battle will be over the funding of the government, and that's a chance for those automatic cuts to be rejiggered.
One of the other things you're seeing right now is this is against the backdrop of the Republican Party coming out of the last election, talking about where they're going to go in the future, how they are going to be seen by the public. You guys mentioned Marco Rubio. He's on the cover of Time magazine this week. I think he's been called, right there, the Republican savior. He put out a tweet saying there's only one savior, and it's not me. A lot of pressure on Marco Rubio, but he's just part of a piece right now. You've seen several top Republicans come out with speeches laying out their vision for where the party should be.
We've got to stop being the stupid party. And I'm serious. It's time for a new Republican Party that talks like adults.
I would argue that a more restrained foreign policy is the true conservative foreign policy.
The average American is not thinking about and trying to wonder about where the Republican Party is. They're thinking about how to make their life work.
Your leader in the House right there, Eric Cantor, where is this debate headed?
I think it's a really good debate for the Republican Party to have. When you lose an election, you ought to be a little bit reflective, and you ought to think back, and you ought to begin to say, what do we need to do differently? Now, we didn't do badly in the election. Look, the president won with less than he was elected by in 2008. Lower popular vote, lower percentage, lower electoral vote. We held the House. We have 30 governors. So the idea that this is some existential crisis, I think, is really overdone right now. But we didn't win. So what do we need to do differently? I kind of like what I'm hearing. I particularly like the very direct line that Governor Jindal took, because I think we have done some politically stupid. That's right. Look, we nearly were in the fiscal cliff. We could have triggered a big tax increase. So I don't want to be stupid, but you also need to be principled and consistent in your values, and I think we are. And, we'll see what happens in the next year or two.
And Marco Rubio does seem to be rising to the top of the heap right now.
Yeah, look, he's everything we need and more. He's modern. He knows who Tupac is. He is on social media. He's part of he has all the blessings of the old political establishment. He's close to the younger Bushes. He and Jeb Bush and George P. Bush create what I called an axis of enlightenment when it comes to immigration. I mean, he's got the policy. He's in touch with, I think, the lives of ordinary people. And he's a very accessible guy. He talks about being a working dad and juggling his own priorities.
You're shaking your head at Tupac.
I think all of this stuff is just surface stuff. It's like lipstick on a pig. I mean, the bottom line is the Republicans have a core values problem, not a who knows
well, I don't think Mark. Well, let me just say, I don't want to gloss over his credentials. I think when it comes to immigration reform, President Obama has stolen from Senator Rubio. So you talk policy.
Rubio has a piecemeal approach to this immigration stuff.
Folks
President Obama took in the Senate, though, right?
of that piecemeal approach.
Well, bottom line is, I think where the country is. We want more aggressive, more direct reform on immigration reform than Marco Rubio is talking about. I think he's behind. I think he's fragmented on the issue. And I think that, the Republicans are looking for anybody.
And I think he's ahead of your caucus in the House on this, right?
We are in the fifth year of waiting for the Obama immigration plan that was supposed to be unveiled within 100 days after his election in 2008. So the president's pretty skillfully used the issue, but he hasn't led on the issue. And we're still waiting for a bill. Now, Rubio's leading at some considerable political risk to himself, which I admire. So, look, I think we're going to get there, but the real leadership on immigration doesn't come from the administration. It's coming out of the Senate.
First of all, the president put out an immigration plan in the first term. I was there. I helped work on it. Obviously, it was an issue in this past election. Republicans have come a long way, even compared to where we were just 6 months ago. Now they're talking about being for the DREAM Act. Now Marco Rubio is talking about earned citizenship for undocumented immigrants. That's a big step forward for Republicans. I hope he can bring the rest of his party along. And, I think that you're seeing a lot of movement on the Republican side on immigration for very basic reasons, the change in demographics in elections. Well, and that's fine. I'm glad they're coming. I don't care why they're coming. They're just coming towards the president on immigration. Hopefully we can get something done.
I want to get to one more issue before we take a break, and this is another potential 2016 contender for the White House. Chris Christie of New Jersey started out the week opening up about his weight on David Letterman, making jokes about it. A former White House doctor took issue with that, said she was worried about his health, Connie Mariano, and then he gave this press conference.
This is just another hack who wants 5 minutes on TV. If she wants to get on a plane and come here to New Jersey and ask me if she wants to examine me and review my medical history, I'll have a conversation with her about that. Until that time, she should shut up.
And John Carly then called her, and I guess they had a fairly heated conversation, says even though she's Republican, not voting for him. But we're laughing about this right now, but Chris Christie talking about this at first for a very good reason. This will be a serious issue if he decides to run for president.
It is, but I've got to make 2 points here. One, this kind of reminds you of what Lincoln supposedly said about Grant and Grant's drinking problem. Christie is the most popular Republican in the land. You almost want to say, find out what kind of donuts he likes and let's ship out a few cases of them. The guy is doing just fine. Let's kind of give him a break. But I will say this. If he seriously takes on the issue of his own health and his weight, remember, Mike Huckabee first became a national figure as governor of Arkansas when he dealt with his own weight, lost 100 pounds, if he kind of turns this into a national version of The Biggest Loser, a political version of The Biggest Loser, Christie can gather even more support. So many Americans relate to what he is dealing with. So many of us are overweight.
And I think a lot of them probably agreed with him in that press conference right there.
I did, but if you're going to run for president, my advice is to stop telling people to shut up. I mean, he's from New Jersey, and so I think that's New Jersey for, give me a minute. But I think if he puts his weight on the table by bringing a donut on Letterman, which was a very skillful political move, turning your own vulnerability or something you feel vulnerable about into something that you make fun of before anyone else does, is political genius. But then it didn't take him 24 hours to reveal a rather thin-skinned side of the issue.
And that's what he's going to have to get into. We do have to take a break.